When was the last time you thought about someone else's race? Was it a pleasant experience? Did you feel a little bit of uncertainty? Many of the most meaningful conversations I've had with friends and colleagues are when we acknowledge each other's full identities, including their racial identity. Yet too often in our schools, communities, or in political conversations, we practice color blindness. We don't acknowledge race, and we allow the loudest voices to be heard, or we fall back on the same tropes and stereotypes that marginalize and other people. Today, I'm going to share with you why we need to break out of these views and change our conversations to being color brave and to practice being kind and brave with each other as we talk about race. First, I need to acknowledge and thank a few people. Melody Hobson coined the term for color brave in her TED Talk. She talked about needing to stop being colorblind and to begin being brave in talking about race. It's a really great TED Talk, so I hope you'll take some time to watch it. The second is my friend and colleague Heidi Schillinger. She created the Color Brave Space Meeting Norms, which includes a line called being kind and brave when we talk about race. Let's break this down. Before I begin talking about bravery and kindness, I want to define a few terms. So race. Racial groups are the big groups that people are grouped into. In the United States, we use the groupings African American and Black, Asian Pacific Islander, Latinx, Native American Indigenous, Middle Eastern and North African, and white. Ethnicities are the subgroups under those. So as an example, my racial identity is Asian. My ethnicities are Japanese and Okinawan. Ethnic groups often have different languages, cultural backgrounds, migration stories, foods, culture within them that differentiate them from other cultural groups. Now, race is also a social construct. This means that people attach importance to race. Humans have constructed racial groups to sort, give privilege to, and to categorize and group things. Now, this wouldn't be a problem if we treated everyone equally, but we know that doesn't happen. If you look across any sector or system, such as the education system, we can see some people are achieving more than others, and we see this happening across racial lines. White and some Asians are graduating at higher rates and seeing higher college admissions than others, such as Latinx, Black, and Indigenous people. We also see disparities in who is referred to for discipline or other punitive types of practices in our education system. We also see these same things across other systems as well, such as in medicine, the judicial system, housing, business, voting rights, government. We can see a disparity in who's represented, who's not, or who receives preferential treatment and who isn't. These policies, practices, and beliefs hold back everyone. Those in power are often white people, and this means that many people of color are at the mercy of the policies and practices that they put into place. People of color, especially Black and Indigenous people, have systematically had their rights denied to them. This is why we also need to be brave in acknowledging these disparities and working to undo them. We need to acknowledge the anti-Blackness, racism, and white privilege that continues to hold all of us back. For white people, this means acknowledging race and your white privileges. For people of color, we also need to understand that our bravery, or the bravery that some may feel more than others, is just part of being who we are. And sometimes we need to and the system puts us into a place where we have to do something different than others in our community. We also need to start practicing more justice-based relationships with each other. So as I mentioned earlier, I grew up in Hawaii. And when I grew up in Hawaii, I was around people, I was part of a people of color majority. In Hawaii, we talk about race all the time. And we acknowledge our race and we acknowledge ethnicities all the time. So a conversation might sound like this. So, you know that teacher that I'm thinking about? The Japanese one whose grandma's from Kauai, and she lives 3 houses down from the Filipino auntie, Luisa. We use terms like Japanese, Filipino. Everyone is an auntie to us. And these terms allow us to be much more clear in what we're thinking about when it comes to race. In Seattle, we don't have those same conversations. Growing up in Hawaii, I was taught to notice from a very early age that people's race and ethnicity. It wasn't until I came to Seattle that I realized this is not the norm in the United States. Maybe in some places it is, but in Seattle, I don't notice these same conversations. It also meant that I had to learn to be brave in talking about race in a new way. I had to learn how coded language works. I had to learn how to navigate different systems in order to be heard and to be successful. I also hope that I don't have to continue to practice this in the same way for the rest of my life. I hope that the rest of our systems will begin to acknowledge race so that we can have much more open and honest conversations with each other. We also need to act with kindness to each other and to be in just relationships with each other. Kindness doesn't mean that we don't hold people accountable, that we don't hold systems accountable for the outcomes that they produce. It means that we need to build relationships with each other so that we can have conversations and be heard and also listen to each other. Kindness means that we sometimes also have to speak up for those who aren't in that conversation, who aren't in the rooms where decisions are being made about them. Kindness also means that we need to be explicit with our language. My friend Carrie is a disabilities justice champion, and she often reminds me, clear is kind. Being clear about what we need, what we can offer, and saying what we mean to say is really important, such as we need to be very clear with our words. As an example, when I use the word equity, equity means many different things depending on the context and who you're talking to. Such as if I say the word equity, and I'm saying that to somebody in the business sector, they are automatically probably going to think about money. But if I use the word equity with colleagues who are doing racial justice work, they're going to think about race. If for others, the word equity may mean gender equity or gender equality. For others in the disabilities world, equity might have something to do with disabilities justice. So we need to be very clear about our language. We also need to practice and begin to use terms that equate with what we mean to say, such as the word Black, Latinx, African American, Native American, Indigenous, Middle Eastern, Asian, Pacific Islander, white. We can use these terms and we need to so we can stop using coded language. Coded language holds us back because it allows for too much ambiguity in what we mean to say. Remember, clear is kind. I will also admit sometimes we all need help in these conversations. So sometimes if I'm in a conversation and I'm tired or I'm a little bit grouchy, I need to reach out and to ask others to help with the conversation as well and to work on listening more. I also hope that I'm in conversations where some of my friends and allies can also help to pick up the conversation if I'm not in a mental space to do so. And I hope that we can all do this together. So sometimes it is kind to sit back and listen. And it's also kind to step forward and to pick up a conversation when some of our friends and allies are not in the right place or too tired to have the conversation. So as you step forward, I hope you'll do so with bravery, and you also practice some kindness with each other. This bravery can also be built up over time. And if you're doing it right, you'll take a few hits along the way. We all have, but that's part of growing, and that's part of being in just relation with each other, where you can say something, be heard, and also have others educate you and to listen and to put into practice some reflection and deep connection so that we can all show up for the next conversation ready to grow together. The more we do this, the more we'll work towards racial justice in our schools, in our community, and together.
Thank you from TEDxMercerIslandHSWomen.